Hello all, and welcome to a product review at Finominal UK, where today we'll be analysing the Vanguard LifeStrategy 100% equity, specifically the accumulation share class. I'm initially going to take a look at the fund fact sheet, where we can see the fund seeks to hold investments that will pay a dividend and increase in value through a portfolio comprising of approximately 100% shares. And it also notes the UK will generally form one of the largest single country exposures for shares. Going to head over to the Fund Explorer. We'll paste the ISIN code in. And as we can see, quite a popular fund indeed, just over 10 billion AUM. Relatively cheap fees as well, 0.22%, and that is to be expected for a passive fund. I'm going to analyze this with the fund analyzer on Finominal, where we can see the platform's suggested benchmark is the FTSE Developed Index. Now, the suggested benchmark index was selected on having the highest ratio of correlation to tracking error from a universe of well-known benchmark indices. Now, I love that we're able to see this level of transparency, because if we actually go over to Vanguard's literacy, we can see they've chosen the IA Global as their benchmark, which shows the Vanguard fund outperforming that, whereas Phenomenal's platform's suggested benchmark actually shows the fund has underperformed against the FTSE Developed Index. Again, I've noted the quite cheap fees of 0.22%. FTSE Developed Index is cheaper at 0.12%. Compound annual growth rate for Vanguard 10.6 versus 12.3 for the FTSE Developed Index. Has seen a decreased amount of volatility though for the Vanguard fund than the index, though max drawdown has slightly been higher for the Vanguard fund versus the FTSE Developed Index. Sharp ratio 0.57 for the Vanguard, 0.62 for the benchmark, and outperformance consistency against the benchmark of 3 out of the last 7 years. Moving over to asset classes, so as we'd expect, 99% in equities. Taking a look at a breakdown of countries, we can see the US exposure just under 50%, which slightly contradicts what the fact sheet says, where the UK will generally form one of the largest single country exposures for the shares, though we are seeing just under 24% within the UK for this fund. Just a note, comparing against the FTSE Developed Index, it's around 68% exposure to the US, whereas we can see the Vanguard LifeStrategy fund is just under 50%. So against its benchmark, that's actually an underweight in US equity exposure and an overweight in UK equity exposure against the benchmark. And we'll see that portrayed more clearly as we dive deeper into the charts. Looking into sector analysis, so we can see we've got an overweight in financials against the benchmark versus an underweight in information technology against the benchmark. So this can actually contribute to the underperformance which we've seen with that a decreased amount of US equity exposure from the benchmark, so not seeing as much performance from those Mag 7 stocks. And also with that overweight in financials, again, the UK having quite a lot of financial institutions for the UK stock market. So that's why we are seeing that. Heading over to risk, looking at drawdown analysis and stress testing. So overall, I would say being relatively similar to its benchmark in regards to drawdowns. We want to replicate this further. Again, we're seeing that portrayed further. Looking at just after the global financial crisis, we saw the Vanguard fund drop by just over 31% against the FTSE Developed just over 28%. So slightly more for the Vanguard fund, but overall has been in keeping. I am now going to do a comparison against its peers. We can either do cheaper peers or all peers. I am going to use the cheaper peers, and we will select some here. So we'll go for the UBS Global Climate Transition, as well as the Vanguard Fund and Mercer Passive Equity Fund. Putting this through the asset comparer, I am also going to add back in the benchmark index, which was the FTSE Developed Index as shown. So as we can see, the Vanguard LifeStrategy 100% equity fund has actually underperformed against all of its cheaper peers as well as the benchmark. So that is worth noting. Looking at breakdown by markets, so again we're seeing that overweight in UK equity exposure and a slight decrease in US equity exposure. So again, that's probably why we're seeing that slight decrease in performance against its peers as well as the benchmark. Looking at the statistics, so as mentioned, out of all of its peers, it is one of the more expensive ones at 0.22%, as well as compound annual growth rate is also the lowest of the lot, though volatility has been the lowest out of all of those as well. So pros and cons, I would say, to this one. It has also seen the highest dividend yield at 1.76% versus 1.43 for that UBS fund and 1.19 for the other Vanguard fund. So, as mentioned, pros and cons to this fund indeed. Well, that brings me to the end of this product review video. I do hope you found it helpful and informative, and if there are any funds or portfolios you'd like me to review, please do leave them in the comments. Other than that, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks all.